Dahlia Zeller didn't see the loose brick until it caught her boot, tilted her forward, and sent her flying straight into the sidewalk with a yelp that echoed down the Manhattan street. Her tote bag hit the ground first, spraying out her sketchbook, a handful of pencils, her thermos, and a crumpled resume she'd printed at the library 30 minutes ago. The resume landed squarely at the polished leather shoes of a man in a navy coat who stopped mid-step and looked down at her with wide eyes. "You okay?" he asked, already crouching beside her. Dahlia winced, pushing herself up to sit on the curb. "I'm fine. Just my pride's a little bruised." He picked up her sketchbook, flipping it closed carefully before handing it to her. "And maybe your knee," he added, glancing at the torn fabric on her black jeans. She followed his gaze. Her kneecap was scraped and blood was already threading down her shin. "Great," she muttered. "Just what I needed before a job interview. Here." The stranger pulled off his coat and folded it in half. "Put that under your leg." "I can't take your coat," she said, blinking at him. "It looks expensive." "It is." He gave her a quick smile. "I can afford dry cleaning. Put your leg up." She hesitated, then accepted his help. His voice had that low, steady tone that didn't invite argument. His hands were warm and careful as he adjusted her position. "I'm fine." "Really?" she said again, feeling the burn of embarrassment creep into her cheeks. "Sure. That's why you were sprawled on the sidewalk like a crime scene." His lips twitched, then his expression softened. "I saw the whole thing. That brick's been loose for months. Someone should have fixed it." She huffed a laugh. "Tell that to Miney. Let me at least drive you to wherever you're going," he added, his tone casual but firm. "You're limping, and I'm not letting you walk around Manhattan bleeding." She opened her mouth to argue again, but then looked at his face properly for the first time. Strong jaw, light stubble, dark brown eyes, and a kind of effortless confidence that didn't feel normal. He was too put together. His coat alone looked like it cost more than her rent, and he didn't have even a speck of city dust on him. "I'm just heading to a job interview. Midtown," she said finally. "But I'm already late." "Then let me get you there faster," he replied. "My car's right here." She expected him to wave down a cab, but instead, he led her to a sleek black car parked at the curb, definitely not a rental. The driver jumped out and opened the door without a word. "You have a driver?" she asked as he helped her in. "I do," he said simply. "I'm Julian Locke." She froze mid-scoot. "As in, Locke Enterprises." He raised a brow. "You've heard of it? You're on the cover of last month's Forbes," she said before she could stop herself. Julian chuckled. "That was a weird week." Dahlia stared at him, stunned. She just tripped in front of one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, and now she was bleeding on his leather seats. "Great," she muttered under her breath. "Just great." They drove in silence for a few moments before Julian spoke again. "What's the job interview for?" "Receptionist. At a graphic design firm. Nothing special." "Don't say that. The world's built on people doing things, nothing special." He leaned back, studying her. "You're an artist?" "I try to be," she said, clutching her sketchbook. "Let me guess. You came to New York with dreams, and now you're trying not to drown in rent, rejection, and caffeine." She turned to look at him slowly. "Are you psychic?" "No. Just been here long enough to know the look." Something in his voice sounded like he remembered that feeling. She looked at him again, really looked, and realized he wasn't just another rich guy in a suit. There was something else under the surface. Something quieter. The car pulled to a stop. "Good luck," Julian said as the driver opened her door. She hesitated. "Thank you. For all of this." He gave her one of those half smiles again. "Try not to trip over any more bricks." She laughed, stepped out, and then turned back. "I'm Dahlia, by the way." "I know," he said, holding up her resume with a teasing glint in his eyes. "I'll be rooting for you, Dahlia Zeller." Then the car pulled away and she stood there on the curb, feeling like she'd just stepped out of a completely different world. The interview was a disaster. Her knee hurt, her mind was spinning from the whole encounter, and the manager barely glanced at her portfolio before saying they'd be in touch. By the time she limped back to her shared studio apartment in Queens, she was exhausted. But when she opened the door, her roommate handed her a crisp white envelope. "This came for you," she said. "Hand-delivered." Dahlia frowned and tore it open. Inside was a single ivory card with elegant black lettering. "Miss Zeller, if you're free for dinner Friday night, I'd like to make it up to you. Julian Locke. P.S. No bricks involved." Her heart did something weird in her chest. Beneath the card was a business card that simply said, "Driver will pick you up at 6. Is this a date?" her roommate asked, peering over her shoulder. "I don't know," Dahlia whispered. But Friday came faster than she expected, and at exactly 6, a black car was waiting outside. Julian met her at the entrance of a rooftop restaurant overlooking the skyline. There were string lights overhead, soft jazz playing somewhere in the background, and only a handful of other diners. "You clean up nicely," he said, his eyes sweeping over her. She wore a simple navy dress she'd borrowed from her roommate, and he looked unfairly good in a dark gray suit without a tie. "You rented out a rooftop restaurant?" she asked, dazed. He shrugged. "I like quiet places to talk." They sat. He ordered for both of them without hesitation steak, truffle risotto, a bottle of red so smooth she barely tasted it before it went to her head. "I'm not used to this," she admitted. "Fancy dinners, chauffeurs, men who run companies that make more in a day than I've made in a lifetime." Julian's eyes softened. "That's just surface. That's not what matters." She looked at him, confused. "Then why me?" He paused, then leaned in. "Because you didn't ask for anything. You were bleeding and embarrassed and still worried about your interview. You were real." Dahlia blinked. "Most people wouldn't care about that." "Well, I do." They were silent for a second, the city lights flickering behind them. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "I haven't stopped thinking about you since that day," he said. Her heart thudded loud in her ears. "Julian, this is crazy." "I know," he said simply. "But when something feels right, you don't walk away from it." And just like that, the night changed. They talked for hours about art and business and growing up lonely, about mistakes and dreams and family. She laughed until her ribs hurt, and when he walked her back to the car, he brushed a thumb across her cheek, his touch warm and grounding. "I'd like to see you again." She nodded, breathless. "Okay." And as the city blurred behind them on the drive home, Dahlia realized something terrifying. She hadn't just tripped over a brick that day. She might have fallen for a man she barely knew. Dahlia stared at the blank canvas in front of her, brush hovering mid-air, motionless. She hadn't touched a single stroke in over an hour. The paints had dried on the palette, the water in her jar had long turned murky. But her mind wasn't in that cramped studio apartment. It was still on the rooftop. Still on Julian Locke. She hadn't seen him in 3 days, but every minute since that dinner had felt like she was balancing on the edge of something enormous. He hadn't called, hadn't sent another message, hadn't appeared at her door in a town car. And yet, that Friday night still lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. She hadn't expected him to chase her, not really. Men like Julian didn't need to, but part of her had hoped. She dipped her brush into the red paint and let it trail a slow, broken line across the canvas. Then came a knock. Sharp, twice, confident. She wiped her hands on her jeans, already stiff from dried paint, and padded barefoot to the door. When she opened it, she blinked hard. Julian stood on the other side. No suit this time, just dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made him look disarmingly normal, except for the quiet intensity in his eyes. "You didn't answer your buzzer," he said. "It's broken," she replied, still a little stunned. "How did you even know where I live?" "I had your resume," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You really should stop putting your address on those." She shut the door behind him, trying to ignore the fact that her apartment smelled faintly of turpentine and desperation. "You tracked me down." "I did," he said, looking around. "Is this your studio?" "It's also my bedroom. And kitchen. And everything." He turned slowly, taking it in. The cracked plaster. The stack of canvases leaning against the wall. The twin mattress set directly on the floor. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even comfortable. But it was hers. "Why are you here, Julian?" He looked at her then in that direct, no detours way that she'd come to recognize. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. And I don't want to pretend otherwise." Her breath caught. "I know this is fast," he went on. "Too fast. You probably think I'm insane. But I haven't felt like this in a long time. Maybe ever." She leaned against the edge of the chipped counter, arms crossed. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Something real." He took a step closer. "I've been surrounded by people who want things from me my entire adult life. Investors, board members, women looking for a ticket to the top floor. They all want Julian Locke, the name. But you didn't want anything from me. You just wanted to get to your interview. That interview didn't go anywhere. Then come work for me." Her eyes widened. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a position as a creative consultant. I have a new philanthropic branch launching this quarter: art therapy programs, education grants, community revitalization. I need someone who knows the language of art, not just someone who can write a press release. She stared at him, stunned. That's insane. Maybe. But it's also real. And I think you're the right person for it. She hesitated. You haven't even seen my work. He walked to her canvas, still wet with the fresh stroke of red, and studied it without speaking. Then, now I have. She didn't answer. Couldn't. There was something terrifying about the way he looked at her, like he already saw everything she was trying to become. I'll think about it, she said finally. He nodded. That's all I ask. Julian didn't kiss her when he left. He just touched her wrist lightly, like a promise, and walked out the door. That night, Dahlia didn't sleep. She painted until the sun came up, the canvas exploding with color she didn't know she had in her. 3 days later, she was in Julian's office. The elevator had opened to a floor that looked more like a private gallery than a corporate suite. Sculptures dotted the hallway. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the corner office. And Julian, back in a suit but with the sleeves pushed up and no tie, stood with his back to the skyline. You came. I'm not saying yes, she said, stepping inside. I'm saying I want to know more. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Fair enough. They spent the next hour buried in documents, portfolios, program outlines. She asked sharp questions. He had sharper answers. It wasn't flirtation, it was business. But beneath that, something else pulsed. Something that hadn't disappeared. You built all of this? She said softly, glancing around. By yourself. He leaned back. Not entirely. I had help. But I started the company with a single silent partner and a lot of sleepless nights. Do you ever miss when it was smaller? Simpler. Every day, he said. But I wouldn't trade it. Not if it means I can do something with it now. She looked at the plan again. You're serious about this art initiative. I don't do things halfway, Dahlia. She nodded slowly. Then I want in. But only on one condition. He raised a brow. You don't get to make decisions for me. Not in this. Not in anything. He grinned, not a smirk, something more grounded. I wouldn't dream of it. That afternoon, he walked her down to the lower floors where the new program space was under construction. It smelled like sawdust and fresh paint, and she could already see the bones of what it could become. I want to host student exhibits here, she said, pacing the room. Let them see their work in a real gallery setting. Done. And we need to make sure the programs don't just go to private schools. This should be for underfunded communities. I agree. She turned, surprised. Really? I didn't bring you on to nod at everything I say. I brought you on because you see things I don't. He was standing so close now. She hadn't realized how much she missed the way his voice dropped when he wasn't performing for the world. You keep looking at me like that, he murmured. I'm going to forget this is a business meeting. She didn't back away. Maybe I want you to forget. He kissed her. It wasn't soft or hesitant, it was honest. Like the answer to a question neither of them had dared ask until now. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. This is going to get complicated. Good, he said. I like complicated. The next few weeks moved like lightning. Dahlia was suddenly part of a world she'd never imagined: boardrooms, pitch decks, event planning. But she didn't just survive it, she thrived in it. Julian gave her space to lead, never questioned her instincts, and when they were alone, he kissed her like she was the only thing anchoring him to the ground. But not everyone was happy. At the next executive meeting, a woman in a slate gray pantsuit eyed Dahlia with open suspicion. Is this your new creative lead? She asked Julian, her voice cool. Dahlia is leading the entire initiative, Julian said without blinking. And she answers only to me. The woman, Elaine, head of PR, smiled tightly. Interesting hire. Dahlia didn't flinch. If you'd like to review my credentials, I'm happy to walk you through the program outline. Julian's eyes flicked to her, something like pride glinting in them. After the meeting, he pulled her into a quiet hallway. You didn't tell me your staff would hate me, she said lightly. They don't hate you. They're just used to being the smartest person in the room. Then they're going to have to get used to disappointment. He laughed, the sound low and surprised. Remind me to always stay on your good side. You're not afraid of strong women? I'm only afraid of losing one. Her stomach fluttered. Neither of them said what they were thinking. Not yet. But that night, as he walked her to the car, he paused before opening the door. Dahlia. She looked up. I don't know where this is going, but I want to see it through. All of it. So do I. And when he kissed her again, it wasn't the rooftop or the office or the gallery. It was something entirely new. The first time Dahlia entered Julian's penthouse, she didn't say a word. Not because she was trying to be polite or because she was overwhelmed, though she was, but because there was something almost sacred about the way the space held its silence. The city spread out below them like a living canvas, lights blinking against the glass walls. The ceilings soared impossibly high, and the living room alone could have swallowed her entire apartment 3 times over. Julian watched her from the doorway, coat slung over one arm, his other hand resting casually in his pocket. If you hate it, I can pretend it belongs to someone else. She turned slowly, eyes still wide. I don't hate it. Good, he said, stepping inside and setting his keys on a marble console table. This place has always felt a little too big. I'm glad someone's here to take up some of the space. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing her fingers lightly to the glass. You can see the river from here. And the park, when the light hits right. He joined her, their reflections barely visible in the glass. I had the windows replaced last year. The original ones were too reflective. I don't like looking at myself when I'm trying to look out. Dahlia turned to him. That's oddly poetic for a man with a boardroom reputation. Julian gave a low laugh. You'd be surprised how many meetings start with silence when I don't say anything first. She followed him into a darker hallway, past abstract paintings and a long walnut shelf filled with books that looked well-read, not decorative. He opened a door at the end of the hall, revealing a room that looked nothing like the rest of the penthouse. Sketches pinned to corkboards. Canvases leaned against the far wall, some unfinished, others fully formed. A long flat table held dozens of paint tubes, most half-used, and several brushes stood bristle up in old coffee mugs. I've been working in here for a while, he said, closing the door behind them. Not professionally. It's just something I need sometimes. Dahlia stared at the room, stunned. You paint. He nodded once. I never show anyone, but I thought you should see it. She walked to one of the larger canvases and tilted her head. The lines were rough, but intentional. There was emotion in them, tension, even. You're better than you think. I'm not trying to be good, he said quietly. Just honest. She turned to him, her voice softer. That's the only part that matters. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. My father used to say that emotions were liabilities. That they cost too much. What do you think? I think I spent too long believing him. Julian's gaze stayed on her. Until I met someone who reminded me what it feels like to actually feel something. Her breath caught. The air between them seemed to shift, thicken. She didn't step away when he walked forward. Didn't look down when he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know how to be casual with you, he said. I've never wanted to be. Then don't be. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Be whatever this is. Just don't lie to me. I won't. His thumb rested against her cheek for a beat longer. But I should warn you, there are things about my life that don't look good in headlines. I'm not afraid of headlines, she said. I'm afraid of being left behind. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he kissed her, slow and deliberate, like a vow made in silence. That night she stayed. They didn't talk about what it meant, didn't try to define it. But when she woke up tangled in his sheets, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor, she knew something had shifted. Something permanent. Julian was already up, seated at the kitchen island, reading a document on his tablet with a steaming espresso beside him. He looked up when she padded in barefoot, one of his shirts hanging off her shoulder. Good morning, he said without hesitation, like this was normal. Like this was theirs. She leaned on the counter. Do you always look like a magazine cover at 7 in the morning? Only when I'm trying to impress someone who steals my clothes. She reached for an apple from the bowl on the counter. Any meetings today? 3. 2 of them could have been emails. And the third? Board review for the new initiative. You're presenting the pilot schedule. Her eyes widened. I thought that wasn't until next week. They bumped it up. Don't worry. You're ready. An hour later, she stood in a sleek glass conference room, watching 10 executives leaf through her presentation packet. Julian sat at the head of the table, silent but focused, letting her lead. Dahlia kept her voice steady, her points clear. She outlined the projected impact, the strategic partnerships, the long-term sustainability. She didn't look at Julian until the end until she said, "We don't need another corporate program with a logo slapped on it. We need something that actually changes lives. This does that." When the meeting ended, the room emptied slowly, several executives nodding to her with newfound respect. Julian walked over as she gathered her papers. "You were brilliant," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted under her breath. "No one could tell." He grabbed her hand briefly, then let it go before anyone could notice. "Come with me." They exited through a side elevator, descending into the garage. A silver coupe waited, sleek and understated. "Where are we going?" she asked as he opened the door for her. "Somewhere quiet." They drove out of the city, past the edges of the boroughs, until the skyline faded into trees and the roads narrowed. An hour later, they pulled into the gravel driveway of a 2-story stone house. Ivy crawled up the front, and a weathered wooden fence marked a small garden blooming with late spring flowers. "This was my mother's," Julian said as they stood in front of the house. "She left it to me when she passed. I haven't been here in years." Dahlia looked up at the windows. "Why now?" "Because I want you to see where I come from. Not the penthouse. Not the headlines. This." Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and something warm she couldn't place. The furniture was modest, the walls lined with books and photographs. A piano stood in the corner, silent but polished. "She taught music lessons here," he said, running a hand along the keys. "She used to say the house had its own rhythm." They sat on the back porch, watching the wind move through the trees. "Why did you stop coming here?" she asked. "Because after she died, it felt like the house stopped breathing." He exhaled slowly. "But now, it doesn't feel so empty." Dahlia reached for his hand. "Thank you for bringing me." Julian looked at her, really looked. "What would you say if I told you I haven't felt like myself in years? Not until you." "I'd say I know exactly what you mean." He stood, pulled her gently to her feet, and wrapped his arms around her. "This, whatever it is between us, it's the only thing that feels real." She rested her head against his chest. "Then hold on to it." He did. For the rest of the afternoon, they stayed there, wrapped in quiet and sun-dappled peace, speaking in fragments between long silences that didn't need filling. But peace never lasts. 2 days later, Dahlia arrived at the office to find a man waiting at her desk. He wore a suit that looked tailored but tired, and his eyes scanned her with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. "You're the new consultant," he said, not a question. "I am. Can I help you?" He handed her a card. The name printed in gold foil made her stomach twist. "Kenneth Vale, Locke Enterprises General Counsel. I'd like a word. Privately." She followed him into a smaller meeting room. He didn't sit. "There's been talk," he said, "about your relationship with Mr. Locke." Dahlia stiffened. "That's not relevant to my position. On the contrary, if there's a conflict of interest, it becomes very relevant." He folded his arms. "This company has a zero-tolerance policy for inappropriate executive conduct." Her voice was calm, but cold. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm saying you should be careful. Not everyone in this building believes you earned your seat." She stood, her spine straight. "Then I'll prove them wrong. With results." Kenneth didn't blink. "That would be wise." As she left the room, her hands clenched at her sides. Julian was waiting in his office. He stood the moment he saw her face. "What happened?" She closed the door behind her. "Your legal counsel just tried to warn me off you." Julian's jaw tightened. "He did what?" "He said people think I'm here because of you." He crossed the room in 2 strides. "You are here because of you. I made sure of it. I know that. But not everyone does." He took her hands, his voice low and steady. "Then we'll show them." Her eyes locked on his. "Together? Always?" The silence in Julian's office was taut with heat as Dahlia stood in front of him, her jaw set, his hands still gently wrapped around hers. And yet, despite the storm that had just rolled through her morning, something in her held steady. He wasn't letting go. And neither was she. Julian's voice was low but firm. "Kenneth Vale doesn't speak for me." "I know," she said. "But he speaks for your company. And if I'm going to keep building this program, I can't do it in your shadow." "You never have," he said, stepping back to give her space. "But I also understand how this looks. Perception can be just as dangerous as truth." Dahlia nodded, her eyes scanning the skyline beyond his window. The city looked different now. Not smaller, but somehow closer, like she was no longer watching from the outside. "Then let's give them something else to talk about." Julian tilted his head. "What are you thinking?" "We fast-tracked the launch showcase." We bring in students, display their work, invite press, donors, community leaders. We show them what this initiative can do. Not in theory, in practice. His eyes lit with approval. You're proposing a full exhibition. In 6 weeks. 3, she corrected. It has to be bold. It has to be undeniable. Julian crossed to his desk, already pulling up scheduling software. Then let's make it happen. Over the next 21 days, sleep became a luxury. Dahlia rotated through schools and community centers, selecting students whose work had never seen the light of day. She coordinated with installation teams, curators, and an entire logistics crew that Julian assigned to her directly. But what surprised her most wasn't his support, it was his restraint. He didn't hover. He didn't correct. He let her lead. Late one evening, after a 12-hour stretch of planning and curation, Dahlia stepped into his townhouse, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, paint on her hands, her phone buzzing endlessly in her jacket pocket. Julian was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping herbs with practiced ease. Something fragrant simmered on the stove, and soft older jazz played from the built-in speakers. She blinked. You made dinner? He looked over his shoulder. You haven't eaten since breakfast. Don't ask how I know that. She dropped her bag and leaned against the counter, watching him. Is this what you do when you're not being the most intimidating man in a boardroom? I cook. I paint. I overwater my succulents. Dahlia smiled, the kind that only came when exhaustion met comfort. You're full of surprises. He plated the food and poured her a glass of white wine, then walked her over to the terrace. The spring night air was warm, and the city hummed in the distance. They ate quietly at first, their legs brushing under the table. After a few minutes, she set her fork down. I'm scared. Julian didn't ask of what. Good. That means it matters. I've never done anything like this. Not at this scale. Not with this much attention. You're not doing it alone. She looked at him, not as the man who had picked her up off the sidewalk, not as the CEO everyone whispered about, but as someone who saw her, wholly. I don't know how I got here, she said quietly. You didn't stumble into this, he said. You built it. I just gave you the floor. You made people listen. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was there between them in the silence that wasn't empty. 2 days before the showcase, disaster hit. The main venue and industrial gallery space Julian's team had secured suffered a burst pipe. The lower floors flooded and the damage was extensive. Dahlia stood in the center of the damp wreckage, the air thick with mildew and frustration. Her phone buzzed with updates from vendors, artists, and volunteers, all waiting for her to tell them what to do. Julian arrived within the hour, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. This was the only space big enough, she said, barely hiding her panic. We can't just find a new one in 48 hours. Not with lighting, security, permits. Come with me, he said. Julian, I don't have time to. Trust me. She followed him out into the street, then into the back of his car. They drove uptown in silence, her thoughts spiraling with every turn. When they finally stopped in front of a sleek building on Central Park West, she frowned. This is your corporate event space, she said. It's off limits. Your board uses it for investor galas. He looked her dead in the eye. Not anymore. I own the building. She stared at him. You're offering it for the showcase? I'm not offering, he said. I'm insisting. Your board's going to lose it. Let them. She swallowed. This space costs more than our entire program's annual budget. Then I'll match the budget with a personal donation. Her knees nearly buckled. Julian. This isn't charity. This is belief. In you. She didn't kiss him. Not there, not then. But the look they exchanged said everything. The next 2 days were a blur of re-coordination, redesign, and round-the-clock setup. But when opening night arrived, it was flawless. The gallery shimmered under soft lighting. Students stood beside their work, beaming with pride. Dahlia watched from the edge of the room, her heart pounding as guests streamed in: artists, philanthropists, press. The mayor's cultural advisor even showed. Julian arrived 15 minutes after the doors opened. Not in a suit, but in a tailored black shirt with the top button undone. His presence magnetic without being overpowering. When he found her near a sculpture installation, he leaned down, his voice just above a whisper. You did it. No, she corrected. We did. The night unfolded in waves of applause, laughter, and quiet awe. Donors pledged support on the spot. 3 schools signed up for the next round of programs. And the students looked like they'd just been handed the world. As the crowd thinned, Julian joined her at the edge of the main hall. He held a champagne flute but hadn't touched it. "I've never seen you like this," he said. "Like what?" "Unstoppable." She turned to him, her eyes shining. "That's what happens when someone finally believes in you." "Then let me prove it again." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim envelope. Inside was a certificate of donation not just to the program but to a permanent arts foundation established in her name. Dahlia's throat tightened. "Julian, this is too much. It's exactly the right amount." She looked at the paper, then at him. "You're not doing this because of us, are you?" "I'm doing it because of you. Because I watched you change lives. Including mine." She didn't answer. She just pulled him into a kiss that ended the night the way it began, with something unexpected, something real. Weeks passed. The program expanded. Dahlia found herself fielding offers she once thought were unreachable. But she stayed. Because this was where she was meant to be. One quiet Saturday morning, she woke in Julian's bed to the smell of coffee and the sound of a piano playing softly downstairs. She patted down barefoot, finding him seated at the keys, his fingers moving with gentle precision. He looked up when she entered, his smile lazy and warm. "You're awake." "Barely. I have something for you." She crossed the room, eyebrows raised. "Another building?" He laughed. "No. Just this." He reached into the bench beside him and pulled out a small leather-bound book. Inside were photographs from the showcase, candid shots of students and their art, each page labeled in his handwriting. She flipped through it slowly, her throat tightening. "You made this. I wanted you to remember what you built. Not just the night, but the impact." She closed the book and looked at him. "You keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Loving me exactly how I never knew I needed." He stood, took her hand, and held it to his chest. "Then let me do it for the rest of our lives." And just like that, he dropped to one knee. No ceremony, no crowd, just them. "I don't want a future where you're not at the center of it. Will you marry me?" She didn't cry. She didn't even hesitate. "Yes." And in that moment, Dahlia finally understood. The day she tripped on that cracked brick, the world hadn't broken open beneath her feet. It had opened up. And standing there in his arms, she knew she would never fall alone again. Dahlia stood frozen at the edge of the living room, her fingers curled around the engagement ring Julian had just slipped onto her hand. It wasn't enormous, not the kind of stone that made headlines or whispered wealth. It was elegant, a vintage setting with a single round diamond, set in platinum, delicate and timeless. Just like the man who'd chosen it. Julian was still kneeling, one hand holding hers, the other resting over his heart. "Say something." She looked at him, her chest flooding with something so fierce and overwhelming it nearly knocked her breath away. "You didn't even let me brush my teeth before proposing." His mouth curved into the kind of smile that made her feel weightless. "If I waited another minute, I would have exploded. I thought billionaires were supposed to have more patience." "I've had enough patience for a lifetime," he said. "But with you, I don't want to waste a single second." She laughed through the tears gathering in her eyes. "Then get off the floor and kiss me." He stood and took her face in his hands, kissing her with the same certainty he'd had when he'd walked into her life. There was no spectacle, no crowd, no flashbulbs. Just the two of them, barefoot in his living room, wrapped in the kind of quiet joy that felt louder than any celebration. The next morning, she found herself pacing the sunlit kitchen while Julian stood near the espresso machine, watching her with amused interest. "We need to talk about what this means," she said, rubbing her temple. "Are we doing a wedding? A real one? Or are we just signing papers and calling it a day?" He poured her coffee into a porcelain cup and set it on the counter. "You're asking the man who bought out a gallery space with 24 hours notice if he wants a real wedding?" She stared at him. "You want a full wedding?" "I want whatever you want. But if you're asking me, yes. I want to marry you in front of every person who ever doubted you. Every person who once looked at me like I was a machine instead of a man. I want them to know what I chose. Who I chose." Her breath caught. "That's going to be a lot. I don't do small. You know that." She took a sip of coffee, trying to calm the sudden rush in her chest. "So where do we even start?" He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. "Here." She blinked. "That better not be a wedding planner's portfolio. It's a list of potential venues. I've already narrowed it down to places with strong architecture and natural light. You hate artificial spotlights." She opened the folder and stared at the photos. Cathedrals, vineyards, a villa in Lake Como. You've been planning this. Only since the moment I realized I wanted to wake up next to you every day for the rest of my life. She set the coffee down and walked over to him. Then let's do it. Julian kissed her forehead. I already booked a private flight to Italy this weekend. Just to look. You're impossible. And you love me anyway. The villa he took her to was perched on a hillside above Bellagio with crumbling stone walls wrapped in blooming vines and an open terrace that overlooked the lake. Dahlia wandered through the old chapel on the grounds, sunlight pouring through stained glass, and stopped at the altar. This is it, she whispered. Julian joined her, sliding his fingers through hers. Then we book it. Everything after that moved with the speed of someone who had the world at his fingertips and someone who had no interest in waiting. The invitations were hand-delivered. The guest list was tight but powerful: friends from the art world, a few board members, her sister who'd flown in from Oregon, and Julian's oldest friend from his college days, a man named Theo who immediately offered to officiate. Dahlia designed her own dress, simple silk, a plunging back, and no embellishments except a hand-painted train. She spent 3 nights finishing herself. It was the only thing she refused to outsource. Julian's suit was black, sharp, and evidently custom-made by someone who didn't even blink when he asked for midnight fittings. The ceremony took place at golden hour. Dahlia stood beneath a trellis of climbing white roses, her hair pinned with tiny crystal stars, her bare shoulders glowing in the Tuscan sun. Julian stood across from her, looking at her like she was the only thing in the world he hadn't yet conquered and never wanted to. Theo's voice was warm and steady as he guided them through their vows. Julian didn't use a script. I didn't believe in home, he said, voice low so only she could hear. Not until you made me want more. Not money, not success. Just more of this. More of you. Always. Dahlia's voice trembled as she spoke. You saw me when no one else did. You gave me space to become, to rise, and you stood beside me, never in front, never behind. I didn't fall in love with the man the world sees. I fell in love with the man who leaves the light on when I stay up painting too late. And I'll keep loving you. For every version you've been and every version you're becoming. When they kissed, the crowd erupted into applause, but neither of them heard it. The moment swallowed them whole. The reception was held in the villa's courtyard, lit by hundreds of floating lanterns and long candlelit tables. The food was fresh, the wine endless, and the music a blend of old jazz and soft Italian ballads. Julian pulled Dahlia into a dance halfway through, her heels abandoned, her laughter rising into the air. I hope you know, he said as they twirled slowly across the stone floor. I'm never going to stop surprising you. You better not, she said, resting her head against his chest. I'd get bored. You'll never be bored with me. She looked up, eyes shining. I believe you. Later, as the guests drifted into the night and the stars bloomed overhead, Julian led her back into the now empty chapel. It was quiet, save for the soft echo of their footsteps. I wanted to give you something, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. She frowned. You already gave me a ring. This isn't that. She opened the box. Inside was a key. It's for the villa, he said. I bought it. Her eyes flew to his. You what? I wanted us to have a place that's ours. Not for business. Not for show. Just somewhere we can disappear to when the world gets too loud. She threw her arms around him. You bought an Italian villa as a wedding gift? I bought it because I can't imagine not returning here with you. She pulled back just enough to look at him. I love you. I love you more. No, I love you more, she said, kissing him again, laughing against his mouth. And I'm going to prove it every day. The next morning, they woke to the sound of birds nesting in the olive trees and sunlight warming the linen sheets. Dahlia rolled over, tracing a finger along Julian's jaw. What happens now? She whispered. He caught her hand and kissed her palm. Now we live? They returned to New York a week later. The press had gotten wind of the wedding, but Julian handled it with a single statement. I married the love of my life, and that's all you need to know. Dahlia's foundation grew. She hired a full-time team, expanded into 10 new schools, and launched a mentorship program pairing students with professional artists. Julian stepped back from day-to-day operations at Locke Enterprises, appointing a new CEO and retaining his role as chairman. He spent his days investing in nonprofits, painting in their shared studio, and occasionally cooking her elaborate dinners with questionable spice levels. They bought a brownstone in Brooklyn. Not flashy. Not massive. Just right. And on the front door, she hung a brass nameplate that said The Locks. 1 year later, on a clear spring morning, Dahlia stood in the gallery where it had all begun, now fully funded, fully hers. She watched a 10-year-old girl unveil her first painting to a stunned crowd, then turned to find Julian beside her, his hand resting gently on the curve of her waist. "She reminds me of you," he said. "She's better than I was." He kissed her temple. "You're still my favorite." And in the quiet that followed, surrounded by color and hope and the hum of new beginnings, she knew without a sliver of doubt. She hadn't just fallen in love with a billionaire. She'd built a life with a man who saw her, chose her, and stood beside her. And she'd never have to fall alone again.